My name is Rachel, and for 11 years, my mother's side of the family had one word for me: charity case. Not spoken cruelly, exactly, always with a smile, always wrapped in something that sounded like concern. "How's Rachel doing? Bless her heart, still working that little job of hers." That's how they talked about me, like I was a project nobody had finished, and for 11 years I let them believe it, because the truth was mine to keep, and I'd learned a long time ago that the people who ask you the least about your life are usually the ones least entitled to the answer. I want to take you back to where this started, because you need to understand the shape of it before I tell you what happened at that reunion, and what happened when the door opened. I was 14 when my parents died. Car accident, wet road, a truck that crossed the center line at the wrong second, on the wrong night. I don't tell that part of the story often, so I'll say it once and move on, because this isn't a story about grief. It's a story about what people do with someone else's grief when they think no one's watching closely enough to notice. My mother's older sister, my Aunt Carol, took me in. She had 2 kids of her own, my cousins Brooke and Jason, and to her credit, she never once said no to taking me. But there's a difference between taking someone in and taking someone in as one of your own, and I learned that difference in small, quiet ways over the next 4 years. Brooke got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass and a speech about responsibility. Jason's soccer tournaments were sacred family events, banners and coolers and the whole extended family showing up. My school events were optional, attendance dependent on whether anything better came up that weekend. It usually did. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it's the reason nobody in that family ever thought to ask what I actually did with my life once I left their house. They'd already decided, somewhere around when I was 16, that I was the kid who needed help, not the kid who might someday be capable of giving it. And once a family decides who you are, they stop updating the file. That's the mistake they made. They stopped updating the file, and then they spent 11 more years being confidently, loudly wrong about who I'd become. I joined the Army 4 months after I turned 18. Not out of some grand patriotic calling, if I'm honest. I joined because it was a way out that came with a paycheck, a plan, and people who didn't already have an opinion of me carved in stone. Aunt Carol cried when I told her, said she wished I'd go to community college instead, said the Army seemed like such a hard road for someone like you. I remember that phrase, someone like you. I never asked her to clarify what she meant. I already knew. What none of them knew, because none of them ever asked, was that I turned out to be good at it. Genuinely, unexpectedly good. I don't say that to brag. I say it because it surprised me too. I'd spent 4 years being told, in 100 small ways, that I was someone who needed to be carried. And then I got to boot camp, and for the first time in my life, nobody cared about my last name or which side of the family dinner table I used to sit at. They cared whether I could do the work, and it turned out I could do the work better than almost anyone around me. I won't walk you through every step of the next 11 years, because it would take all night, but I'll give you the shape of it. I went in as an infantryman's support role, moved into logistics, and somewhere in my mid-20s, an officer I respected more than almost anyone I'd ever met pulled me aside and told me I was wasting myself in the lane I was in. She's the reason I applied for officer candidate school. She's the reason I said yes when the answer used to be automatically no, because saying yes to anything meant risking finding out I wasn't good enough, and I'd had enough of finding that out from people who never even gave me a fair shot to prove otherwise. I got my commission at 26. I deployed twice. The second deployment is the one I don't talk about much, even now, because some of it isn't mine to tell. It involves other people's worst days, and I've never felt right about turning someone else's worst day into content for my own story. But I'll tell you this much. There was an incident, a convoy, a decision made in about 4 seconds that I've replayed 10,000 times since, and it ended with everyone in that vehicle going home to their families instead of not. I was recommended for a commendation. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell them because, honestly, by that point, I'd stopped expecting them to care, and it's a strange kind of peace, giving up on being understood by people who were never going to make the effort anyway. By the time I was 31, I held the rank of major. I was leading logistics and operations for a unit of just under 200 people, responsible for supply chains that, if I got them wrong, meant soldiers didn't have what they needed at the moment they needed it most. That's not a job you get handed because someone feels sorry for you. That's a job you earn one relentless, unglamorous decision at a time. For years, while people who've never once asked what you do keep calling you the charity case at Thanksgiving. I want to be fair here, because this story isn't really about the military. It's about what it does to a person to be quietly excellent at something for over a decade, while the people who are supposed to know you best keep describing a version of you that stopped being true before you were even 19. Every year, my mother's side of the family holds a reunion over Labor Day weekend at my late grandfather's old property out in the hill country. It's a big deal to them. Caterers, a rented tent, family slideshow, the whole production. I went most years, partly out of some stubborn loyalty to my mother's memory, and partly, if I'm honest, because some small part of me kept hoping that eventually someone would ask a real question and actually wait for the answer. This past year, I almost didn't go. I'd just come off a grueling stretch. New posting, new responsibilities, barely any sleep in the weeks before. And the last thing I wanted was 4 hours of small talk with people who introduced me to their friends as, my cousin, she does some kind of office work for the government. We're not totally sure what. That's a direct quote, by the way. Cousin Brooke said it to a woman I'd never met, standing about 3 feet away from me, like I wasn't capable of answering for myself. I let it go. I always let it go. That was the pattern. I almost didn't go, but my grandfather's sister, my great-aunt Eleanor, called me personally and asked me to come, because she wasn't sure how many more of these she had left in her, and something in her voice made it impossible to say no. So I went. I wore civilian clothes, said as little as possible, and mostly stood near the food table talking to the 2 or 3 relatives who'd ever bothered to know me as an adult, rather than as the kid Carol took in out of obligation. The moment that broke something in me happened about 2 hours in, during the toast. My Uncle Gary, Aunt Carol's husband, stood up with a glass of sweet tea and started going around the family, saying something nice about each of the kids, which by that point included several actual adults in their 30s. He got to Jason first, successful contractor, just closed on a big property deal, round of applause. Then Brooke, 2 kids, thriving real estate business, another round of applause. Then he got to me. He paused, smiled the way people smile when they think they're being generous, and said, "And of course, Rachel, we're all just so proud of how far she's come, considering everything. This family's always believed in taking care of our own, even the ones who needed a little extra help along the way." He raised his glass to me specifically. To Rachel, our little charity case, all grown up. There was laughter. Warm laughter. The kind that thinks it's affectionate. Somebody clapped. I stood there, holding a paper cup of lemonade, 31 years old, a major in the United States Army, having led 200 people through a deployment that some of them wouldn't have survived without decisions I made at 4 in the morning, with no one there to hold my hand through it, and I was being toasted, in front of 40 relatives, as the family's charity project. I didn't say anything. I want to be honest about that too. In the moment, I didn't correct him, didn't defend myself, didn't announce my rank like it was a mic drop, partly because that's not who I am, and partly because some tired, worn-down part of me had simply stopped expecting this family to update the file on who I'd become. I smiled, said thank you for the kind words, and went back to eating potato salad I didn't taste. What none of them knew, what I hadn't told a single person at that reunion, was that my commanding officer, Colonel Denise Whitfield, had reached out to me 2 weeks earlier. There was a ceremony coming up, a formal one, recognizing several members of the unit for the convoy incident I mentioned earlier, the one I never talked about. My name was on that list. Colonel Whitfield had asked, almost in passing, where I'd be over Labor Day weekend, since the timing of the announcement was still being finalized, and she wanted to make sure I could be reached. I told her, out of politeness more than anything, that I'd be at a family reunion in the hill country. I never expected her to remember that detail. Colonels have 100 things to track. I certainly never expected what happened next. About 40 minutes after Gary's toast, While most of the family had drifted toward the dessert table, I heard gravel crunching under tires out past the tree line, near the gate my grandfather used to keep chained shut for deliveries. A car door, then another. I didn't think much of it. Extended family showed up late to these things all the time. Then I heard my Aunt Carol's voice go strange. Not loud, just strange. The particular tone people use when something doesn't match what they expected to see. I turned around, and walking up the gravel path toward the tent, in full formal uniform, was Colonel Whitfield, along with 2 members of my unit I recognized immediately, Sergeant Ruiz and Captain Alvarez, both of whom had been in that convoy with me. They weren't smiling casually. They were walking with the kind of purpose that makes 40 relatives at a Labor Day reunion go quiet without anyone telling them to. I'll admit, for one full second, I didn't understand what was happening either. Then Colonel Whitfield found me in the crowd, and her face did something I'd only seen her do in serious moments. A kind of settled, formal warmth. She said my rank before she said my name. Major Bennett. Not Rachel. Major Bennett. In front of every single person who'd spent the last 2 hours calling me their charity case. She explained, briefly, to a tent full of people who had no idea what she was talking about, that the formal ceremony had been moved up by 2 weeks due to scheduling conflicts on the base, and that given the significance of the recognition, and given that I couldn't be reached to reschedule around the family event, she'd made the decision to bring the ceremony to me instead of asking me to leave my family and come to it. She said that not lightly. She said it like it mattered to her that I not have to choose between honoring my family's tradition and being present for something the entire unit had worked toward for months. Then she read the citation. I'm not going to walk you through every word of it, because some of what's in there belongs to the people I served with more than it belongs to me, but I'll tell you the shape of it. It described a decision made under fire, in the dark, with incomplete information, that resulted in every soldier under my direction returning home. It used words like exceptional judgment and extraordinary composure under threat. It ended with the words, Major Rachel Bennett is hereby recognized for gallantry in the performance of her duties. There is a particular kind of silence that happens when 40 people simultaneously realize they've had the wrong file open on someone for over a decade. I watched it happen in real time, across face after face. Aunt Carol's hand went to her mouth. Uncle Gary, still holding the same glass of sweet tea from his toast, just stood there like the words wouldn't fully load. Brooke looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, which, in a way, she was. Colonel Whitfield pinned the medal herself. Sergeant Ruiz, standing just behind her, caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, the kind that says, I know exactly what that night cost you, and I'm glad the people who raised you finally know it too. Captain Alvarez didn't say anything at all. He didn't need to. He'd been in that vehicle. Some things don't need narration. After the ceremony wrapped, after the applause finally started, genuine and stunned, and about 11 years too late, Colonel Whitfield and my unit mates stayed for maybe 20 minutes, polite and professional, before excusing themselves to head back to base. Before she left, Colonel Whitfield shook my Aunt Carol's hand and said, without an ounce of malice in her voice, just plain fact, you should be very proud of her. Not everyone has what it takes to make the calls she made that night. Carol just nodded, because there wasn't really anything left to say. I didn't gloat afterward. I want to be clear about that, because I know how this kind of story is supposed to end, with some triumphant speech where I finally tell everyone off. That's not what happened, and honestly, it's not who I wanted to become in that moment. I'd spent too many years being defined by other people's small opinions of me to spend the rest of my life defined by my own bitterness about it. Instead, I just quietly finished my lemonade, accepted a few overdue, awkward apologies from relatives who suddenly remembered they'd always believed in me, and let the afternoon move on. Uncle Gary found me later, near the cars, as people were starting to leave. He didn't apologize outright. Some people never quite manage that. But he said, I didn't know, Rachel. I really didn't know. And I told him the truth, plainly, without anger, because by that point, the anger had mostly burned itself out watching that citation get read out loud. I said you didn't know because nobody ever asked. For 11 years, nobody in this family asked me a real question, and waited around for the real answer. That's not really about the army, Gary. That's just about whether you were curious enough to find out who I actually was. He didn't have a response to that. I don't think there really is one. Aunt Carol and I talked a little more, a few weeks later, over coffee, just the two of us. She cried, actually cried, and said she'd always thought she was doing right by me, taking me in, and that somewhere along the way she must have decided that meant she didn't need to keep learning who I was becoming. I told her I understood how that happens. People get a story fixed in their heads about someone, especially someone they've decided needs help, and it's easier to keep believing the old story than to update it. It doesn't make it right. But I understood it. Understanding it and forgiving it aren't quite the same thing, and I'm still working on the second part. Some days I'm closer than others. Things are different now, in small, uneven ways. Brooke texts me sometimes, actual questions now, about deployments, about the work, about what my day-to-day actually looks like. Jason still doesn't quite know what to do with the new version of me, and honestly, that's fine. Some relationships take longer to catch up to reality than others, and I'm not in a hurry to force it. The thing I keep coming back to, when I think about that day, isn't the medal, and it isn't even really the moment Colonel Whitfield said my rank in front of everyone. It's something smaller. It's the memory of standing at that dessert table right after the toast, holding a cup of lemonade, 31 years old, having quietly decided, one more time, to let it go rather than defend myself. I think about how close I came to never being seen at all, if that ceremony hadn't happened to land on exactly that weekend. I think about how many people spend their whole lives being underestimated by the very people who were supposed to know them best, and never get the gravel-crunching, uniform-walking, citation-reading moment that finally sets the record straight. I got mine. Not because I demanded it, not because I fought for it in that tent, but because I'd spent 11 years quietly becoming someone worth recognizing, whether or not my family was paying attention. That's the part I want people to take from this. If they take anything at all, you don't owe anyone an announcement of your own worth. Keep building it quietly. Keep showing up for the people who actually see you, and let the truth arrive in its own time, in its own uniform, walking up the gravel path exactly when it's ready.